Hey there guys, welcome to this week's painting video for the Mortal Realms magazine, and here you can see I am painting up a Judicator. So obviously I've decided to go for the bow guys. I think they were called the storm bows, something like that, but yeah, these guys instead of the crossbows. I figured we've got enough crossbow guys with the army, so I'll go with the bow guys on these. So obviously this is a Judicator Prime, and I will say here that I think I may have placed his shoulder pauldrons on the wrong shoulders. I'm sure I followed the instructions in the issue, but looking at all the other primes, I think the lion is supposed to go on his left shoulder, and then the hammer symbol is supposed to go on the right. So I will at some point rip those off and switch them around, but throughout this video obviously it's just going to be this way around. So yeah, first of all, as always, going to get a 2 or 3 layers of thinned down Incubi Darkness, get a nice coverage over all of the areas that obviously I want to be the main armour. And I'll get on with this and be back in just a bit. Okay, next up I'll take some Abaddon Black and use this to paint in pretty much all of the remaining areas of the model, with exception to anything that is going to be white, which is pretty much the shoulder pauldron and his face. Everything else is going to be painted black, so that it gives a better undertone for the colours going over the top. Obviously there are areas such as the under armour, the arrows, quiver, bow, things like that that will be black anyway. Other areas that will be metallic, whether silver or gold, will obviously go better over a black base coat, and so I will apply that to those areas as well. Right, and next up I'm taking some Sotek green and I've thinned this down a little bit. Not quite a glaze consistency, I do want it you know, a little bit of thickness on there, but what I'm doing is pretty much sketching in all of the mid-tone areas. This isn't going to be a perfectly smooth blend between the Incubi and the Sotek green, but I can sort of neaten that up in a step later on. But what I'm trying to do is obviously get a gradient, or a rough gradient, between the Incubi Darkness and the Sotek green. I'll go back over, I will layer this slightly to build it up to a more opaque colour as it gets closer to a highlight point, but this isn't the traditional glazing that I would normally do. Right, and once the armour's done, I will then take a small amount of Ahriman blue and mix this about equal quantities of Ahriman blue and the Sotek green, maybe a little bit more towards the Ahriman blue side, as you can see there. And I'll use this as an edge highlight across the entire model, obviously the blue armour areas. The reason I use this, obviously in the shadow areas you're still going to get edge highlights. Apologies for it being behind the paint cam there, or the palette cam. But yeah, I want this as an edge highlight everywhere, and then I'll go in and do an edge highlight on sort of the uppermost sections in the next step. But all I'm doing is, as you can see, very carefully just pulling that brush. This is a size 2 brush, I believe. Just covering, you know, the edges of all of the armour. Here I like to put a bit of a highlight spot on helmets and rounded areas. This is thinned down quite a bit. so it will go on a little bit bright and then dull down, and I may go over a few times in a few places just to again bring that opaque back up, make it a little bit brighter. But for now this will go, like I say, edge highlighting all of the edges of the armour. Okay, so once that initial highlighting is done, I'm now taking some Coelia green shade and I'm going across all of the blue areas, all of the armour plating, letting it pull up a little bit in creases and areas where I want a little bit of a darker shading. I'm also going across flatter panels, but I'm not letting it pull on them. It's just to sort of stain that area, so that the entire model is covered with this, and it will give a uniformity throughout. Obviously you don't want it pooling on flatter areas, otherwise that will leave sort of tea stain type marks, but you do want it in some of those recesses just to darken them up slightly, and in places where some of that armour plating, in particular on the back of the calf muscle, you can see that it's got that sort of under dip there. I'll let that go a little bit darker there, just to show that area of muscle definition there. I'll then leave this for about 10 minutes to dry fully, and then come back for the next stage. Okay, so once that Coelia green shade has had time to dry, I'm now going back over some of the more highlight points with some thinned down Sotek green. You can see that this is quite thin, this is a little bit more towards the glaze consistency, and this is just to add some highlight and neaten up some of those more brighter areas. So you can see on the inside leg here, I'm picking out the sort of the bulbous part of the muscle, leaving any of those darker recesses that the green shade has created. You know, along sort of the flats of the boots here, I'm just picking off the flat edges and not going right up to that inside edge, and the same with, you know, other plates of armour, just sort of highlighting, you know, thinking about where the light is coming from, which is usually to the top right, as I have it, or in the case of this model, and pretty much sort of above him. So anywhere that's going to catch that light, we'll get a layer of this, and then I can move on to the next step. Okay, so for the final highlight, I'm just taking a small amount of the Albiman blue here and some Korvax white, and just making up a lighter blue, and this is going to be my final edge highlight. So this will be any edge highlight that is parallel with the ground, obviously facing the sky, so the light source coming from above is just going to pick off the tops of any of those plates of armour. For example, the knee pads here, the step down on each of the feet, the tops of his gauntlets and his neck rim, fingers, you know, little areas like that. Being very careful to keep this line as thin as possible, and yeah, obviously that'll be the edge highlights. So I'll get on with this and catch you guys in a bit. Okay, so with the blue of the armour now finished, I'm just taking some Korvax white here for the shoulder pauldron. As I said, this is the wrong shoulder pauldron. The lion head type 1 should be on this shoulder, and then this should actually be the one with the hammer and bolts on it, on the other shoulder. I'm not sure whether I got that wrong, looked at it wrong in the build instructions, or if the build instructions were wrong, I'm not sure, but looking at all the other ones, I'm going to switch it over, even if it is supposed to be this way, just because then he's uniform with, you know, all the other models in the army. I'll also obviously pick up the lightning bolt on the knee here, and that will pretty much be it for the Corax White. Okay, so moving on to the red leather areas now. We've got the obviously these sort of tassely bits down the front of him here, and with these guys I've also decided to do the belt in red, as well as the strap that holds their elbow guard in place, which you can see on the inside forearm of his bow arm there. Obviously the outside of the chainmail piece of the loincloth, or whatever you want to call this piece, that comes down the front here, will be done in red also. Okay, so with that first layer of Mephiston red down, I'm now going to go around all of those red areas with some Evil Sun's Scarlet and edge highlight both the top and bottom of everything, left and right sides. This is to give the obviously, as I said before with the armour, that highlight that you'll get on the underside of things as well as the top side. It's not a full light highlight, it's more of a reflective light highlight when it comes to the bottom of things. You know, areas still catch light even in a small area of shadow. So yeah, using the Evil Sun Scarlet for this, trying to keep my lines as thin as possible. If on an area I do happen to go a little too thick, take this strap for example, for his belt, all I would do is let it dry, and then with a bit of Mephiston red, go back in and just touch straight down the middle of the belt, and that will obviously thin down that line, the Wild Rider red, or sorry, the Evil Sun Scarlet red, that went a little bit too thick, and that will leave it just on the edge of the highlight. Right, and as the final edge highlight for the red areas, I'm using some Wild Rider red. This does have a little bit of an orange tint to it, so I don't tend to use it if I want a dark red, but it does work well as a highlight for a slightly brighter red. The one thing I don't recommend is mixing in white with red, because you'll get pink, and that's not always a great look for reds. It can work on some things, but generally I try to stay away from using white. Usually to highlight I will use a small amount of yellow mixed in, otherwise I'll go with the Wild Rider red as I'm using here. Okay, so next up I go about painting all of the gold areas with Retributor armour, and as you can see the black gives a much nicer finish for the Retributor armour. I hate using gold over pale colours, or any metallics over a lighter colour like a grey or white. To me it just doesn't show properly. A black or brown is a much better undertone for using golds. So obviously this is going to go over the areas of the bow, leaving sort of the shaft of the bow in black. This will also be used on his pauldron, the sort of the metallic part for his headdress, and the trimming on his quiver. So obviously he's got the top and bottom part of the quiver, that will be done in gold as well, and I do believe I also do the belt buckle on the on his belt in gold as well. So I'll get on with this bit, and then we can come back and have a look at the next step. Right, so with all the gold areas now done, I'm just taking some iron breaker and going over all of the what I call the silver areas. Obviously they're not silver, they are a metallic, be it iron or steel or anything like that, but as you know, I just refer it to the colour silver rather than the actual metal. So for this, you can see I've done the arrowhead and the point that he holds onto, as well as the top and bottom of the little sort of pouch flask thing that he has here, and then also not forgetting the arrows that he has in his quiver. I'll also do any sort of loop links, you know, anything that attaches belts to buckles and things like that will also be done in the iron breaker. Right, so moving on, I'm now using some Screamer Pink for the plume on the helmet. I think that's what you call it. The reason I'm using the Screamer Pink for this rather than a red is just to have it stand out from the cloth and sort of the leather straps down at the waist of the model. I like to do this so that you can tell the difference between the you know, the fur or hair and things like that, and the cloth at the on other parts of the model. It's just a nice way of using a similar colour. Obviously, Screamer Pink being a purple, which, you know, red and blue, so it's got that combination of colours there, which is reflected throughout the model, and I feel it just ties the model in nicely together. What I will then do is, whilst it's still a little bit wet, I will mix up some Corax White and the Screamer Pink to get a paler colour, and just lightly brush this across the hair, just to pick off the you know, the highlight areas, and this will give it a little bit more definition on the top of the hair. I will then finish that with a small quick wash of Caribou Crimson. What this will do is stain that slightly lighter colour, give it a little bit more of a reddish tint, and also obviously sit in the recesses and darken those up, which will make the hair stand out a lot more. Next, I'll take some non-oil and apply this over all of the silver areas. So obviously focusing on the mail, chain mail, I think it's supposed to be, or some sort of scale mail, plate mail, something like that, on the cloth at the front here, and then obviously a small amount just on the arrow tips and you know, buckles and things like that. And for the golds, I will use some Reichland Flesh Shade. Now you can see here I'm trying to apply it in a fashion where it sort of pulls up in some areas, and then I'll let it or try and smooth it out in other areas. Obviously flat surfaces I don't want it so much, but I do want to have a bit of a stain from the Flesh Shade. But other areas where the light won't reach, obviously I want it to pull just a little bit more. This is the gloss version, and I do recommend being careful with this. If you apply too much in one go or let it pull too much, it tends to go start to look a little bit like a gel has been placed over the top. At least that's the only way I can sort of explain it. So I try not to let it pull too much. I may go over with a second layer if I feel that it's not dark enough in a certain area, but otherwise generally I try to use it more as a stain. Obviously the reason I use the gloss version is it does have that shine to it. It's not going to matte anything down, even though I'm going to apply matte varnish over all of this anyway. The gloss just helps retain a little bit of that shine. Even with the matte varnish over the top, you'll still be able to tell that it's a metallic there. Right, so once the shades have all had time to fully dry, so about 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. I'm now taking some Auric Armor Gold and using this just as an edge highlight over the all of the gold areas. So obviously using it where the light would catch the most on the rounded edges, and then sort of trying to sort of fade it off a little bit towards the darker area edges. I don't use this too much as a highlight on the bottom of areas. It is more of that final highlight on the sort of the more flatter, exposed to the sky surfaces. I'll then do the same thing with all of the iron breaker, so the the silver areas, using some Stormhost silver. So very carefully, just trying to catch the edges of the scales here, which is why I'm working from top to bottom rather than bottom from top, otherwise it would catch on the underside of everything and cover up that shading. And then obviously on the top portion of each of the arrows, because of the angle of them, and yeah, that's that done. And finally, to finish off the model, I'm using some Eshin Grey and using this again as an edge highlight to all of the black areas. So that's the main arms of the bow. Now these are angled, so they've got sort of 4 edges. I do all of them with this, keeping a little away from the gold area, so it's a little bit of a shadow edge there. But obviously I'll go around the arrow, the bow and the quiver and the arrows there, as well as the under armour, obviously the under armour behind his knees and in the folds of his elbows. I'll make sure to get this on there as well. And finally, to finish the model off, I'll just take some Dawnstone and go over again the exposed to the sky edges along the top of the arrow, and obviously the bow and the quiver on the back. You'll see here that I'm only touching 2 or 3 sides of the bow, not the undersides, and just trying to work out or decide where the light would catch the most. And with that, the model is done. So let's take a look. Okay, and there he is, guys, all fully painted up. Obviously I've not done his base yet, as I've mentioned before. I'm still trying to come up with a theme for basing all of them to match the pre-sculpted bases that come with some of the models. But I do obviously hope to have them all fully based out for the reveal video at the end of the series. So obviously after issue 80 or around about then, obviously I'm hoping to go through both armies so you guys can see them fully painted up. But that does bring us to the end of the video. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If you have, as always, please hit that like button, give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments, questions, anything like that, leave those down in the comments. If you're not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button. And if you are newly subscribed, a big warm welcome to you. Thank you for supporting the channel by subscribing. And until next time, guys, take it easy and keep painting those minis.